There is a lot that you probably missed in this chapter, because Hunter x Hunter is back to one of my personal favorite things, which is lengthy explanations of abilities being applied through very stringent rules. But underneath all of that, there is some big stuff happening. And also, we have a very big announcement, because one of Togashi's assistants has confirmed exactly how many more chapters we can expect. And I'll tell you right now, it is much better news than I ever could have hoped for. So I'm gonna do the shameful YouTube thing and just sort of leave that lingering for a bit, because we need to get into this chapter. I said that very aggressively because it's that good. So the Phantom Troop flashback is now over, which in some ways I think is a bit of a shame. I was looking forward to that maybe one last step to take us right up to the Kurta events, but I do have to say I'm quite satisfied for now. One, because it leaves a lot of their actions there in the unknown zone for us to draw our own conclusions, and two, because the flashback may not necessarily be over yet. The Phantom Troop are currently chopped up into all sorts of groups, and we may well be telling their full story within those fragmented groups. But for right now, we are back into Haley hunting season, and I've seen that a few people are a bit confused by what's happening right now with the room and the door and the dudes and the everything. God, there's so much of the stuff. So just quickly, the troop busted through a wall and entered the room through the back toilet. After that, Fei-Ten and the unnamed guy exited the room through the doorway, but then when the guy re-entered the room through that same doorway, he vanished. He was teleported away. So Nobunaga designates this as a landmine type Nen ability, which to my understanding is a direct application of aura to a very specific area, in this case being the doorway. And this type of ability is so aura intensive that it's estimated that a user could only place 2 to 3 landmines at once. What I found really interesting was the fact that it only works one way. If you're already in the room, then yeah, you can leave through the doorway, because it only triggers if you enter the room through the doorway. Although assumedly the Nen user could plant the landmines and switch it to the other way around. But in case you've forgotten or just didn't pay attention, either is fine. This landmine ability belongs to Haley member Vaconte, who looks like a really nice guy, but he's currently a level 26, meaning that he's murdered 26 people. Vaconte is also an emitter, which is very important because his ability, it takes us all the way back to the days of Nov. Traditionally, Nov has been identified as a conjurer, and that's because the official databook labels him as such, so I can understand where that impression comes from. However, in this case, we prove that that information is just as unreliable as always, because Togashi himself very recently classified Nov as an emitter in the memo for his exhibition. But both Nov and Vaconte's abilities follow very similar principles of teleportation and restricted travel between rooms. The key difference is that Nov is an absolute boss and just emitted his own Nen mansion, whereas Vaconte is a Nen scrub and is just using existing rooms. Although as we discover at the end, he's also potentially using a room crafted by the abilities of other members of the Haley family. And we know this because in chapter 394, Terabellum, which is this guy. Yes, he has a name. Yes, I know it. Yes, I've commissioned my artist to make custom art of him. It's just the state of my life right now. But Terabellum flat out stated that Vaconte was connecting 2 different rooms together. So the way I now like to think of Vaconte is like a budget Nov, which is still very dangerous, by the way. Nov's abilities were exceptionally overpowered, and even having access to a much watered down version of that gives the Haley family a shocking degree of versatility. A lot of this opening section also features a very classic Togashi trademark, which is the whole characters speculating on abilities or events that the readers already have the answers to. Because we've known that the old man's conjuration and the Vaconte's doorway powers are 2 separate things. We've known that for quite a long time. In fact, we knew that before this whole room mini-arc began. So we spend a lot of time with Finks and Nobunaga, arguing it out and coming to their own personal conclusions, which I always find interesting because from a purely storytelling perspective, it's quite an inefficient way to do things. Because we as readers know from the get-go that Finks is just flat out wrong. So it can feel a bit redundant and or pointless to dive into his thoughts and see all of the mind diagrams and the hypotheses. It's definitely not lean storytelling, and I could definitely see some people designating this as like a bit of a waste of panels. However, me personally, I really like seeing these characters showing their working and then still coming to the right conclusion. Often in narratives, I think characters are just given the advantage of knowing stuff instantly that the readers know, or figuring it out instantly, because it just saves time and having to repeat steps that we already have gotten to. And yeah, that's great for streamlining the story and such, but Togashi's approach makes these characters feel so much more real. And of course, the ultimate point of having this Nenni argument was ultimately to find a reason to split Finks and Nobunaga at the end of the chapter, creating a strain on the troop dynamic so that Nobunaga would be more inclined to have some fun, deadly adventures with new best friend Hinri. It's just like the meme. Friendship ended with Finks, now Hinri is my best friend. Also, Finks and Nobunaga arguing about Nen, just gonna put this out there. But it sounds exactly like every Nen speculation Reddit thread that I've ever seen, and I love it. Before we move on, I just want to express my general appreciation for Feitan, as always. He had a couple of really great moments in 398. I especially enjoyed every time he wiggled his sword to get the victims to do something. And also the commentary of don't get him started, because he rarely stops after cutting off the ears, which is also kind of shocking, directly juxtaposed against the Sarasa events that we just saw. To think that after everything that happened to her, Feitan basically became one of those torturers, just chopping people up. Those videos definitely taught him a lot. Now, as for the plan going forward, I think that some people were a bit shocked by the sheer recklessness of Henry's actions, not only willingly stepping into the trap, but also handing what could be his life's final act to the Phantom Troop, people that he had never met up until now and had no real reason to trust. I think it makes sense though, because Henry understands exactly how desperate this situation is. They can't just keep taking their time and feeding more underlings to the Hailey family, making them stronger and stronger. Morena needs to be stopped right here and now, because every minute that goes by, they become more powerful, more experienced, they talk to each other, they have ideas. So Henry is volunteering to quite possibly die in the trap so that he can sick the calamity that is the Phantom Troop directly on Morena. And I don't think this is particularly surprising either, because the Jiyu family does seem to operate with a very strong sense of loyalty and always working towards the greater prosperity. Like Misha, the woman who died, but left behind the post-mortem Nen zombie girl ability. Also, I just want to say that I have never identified with a troop member stronger than I did with Nobunaga in this chapter. When Henry turned that transmitter into an oyster, I physically recoiled. I despise seafood, especially anything raw. Now with that out of the way, everything else Henry did impressed the crap out of me. He saw what needed to be done, and then he did the thing it is that he saw. Plus, this might be a bit overlooked, but as soon as he got teleported, he immediately turned around and dropped to the floor, which was almost certainly a funky maneuver performed to avoid being attacked, which is exactly what we saw happening to that one guy who was killed from behind after he got teleported trying to retrieve his shiv. Why did you do that, guy? Were you not paying attention? No, you weren't. And now you're dead. But it's small stuff like that that shows Henry's experience. So even if he did walk into the same trap, he would have had a fighting chance of surviving. Very unfortunately for Henry, the Hailey family are currently that one step ahead. And the only thing that can now potentially save Henry is the new best bromance in the series. After Gon and Killua heartbreakingly split up, Nobunaga and Henry is a very welcome combination, with Nobunaga taking quite the liking to Henry, even asking for his name, and just saying, no, call me Nobunaga, drop the honorifics, bruh. It almost gives me the feeling that Henry is being auditioned as a potential troop member. And he does right now have an ability that they so sorely lack, which is general information gathering. But I do think that Henry is probably a bit too married to the Jiyu family and the whole mafia thing. Unless the family was completely wiped out, that could be a thing. But even then, he would join the troop just to get killed by Hisoka. Speaking of, that's a connection we probably shouldn't forget. Henry theoretically knows where Hisoka is. Most of that knowing does depend on whether or not Hisoka actually did the thing that Henry proposed, and I don't know how confident I am with Hisoka following instructions, but our situation here could be where that key information gets passed on to the troop. Provided that Nobunaga and Henry don't pass on first, which, well, to be honest, I feel is very possible right now. Maybe it's just the atmosphere of the room that was created. But the end of the chapter had me extremely tense, because we're dealing with two characters who aren't, strictly speaking, absolutely integral to the progression of the story. One or both of them could absolutely die here. And the room itself is just terrifying. I love and hate the atmosphere of it at the same time. It gives me some really filthy, gruesome Saw vibes, which given all of the murdering that's happened in there is probably understandable. But the room itself also has this very twisted sense of humor. If you look carefully, you'll notice there's a poster on the wall of the Fly, which given all of the teleportation powers in play is disgustingly appropriate. But also they've gone to the trouble to segregate the bathrooms by gender. However, the way in which they've done that is by writing the symbols on what looks to be just an excessive amount of blood. We didn't need that much blood. This would have been fine. Instead, it's smear. But look, as someone who used to design for theater, this set, or this stage as Nobunaga calls it, is perfect, because the location itself creates an incredibly unsettling feeling. And in case you're wondering, that room that this chapter leaves us on, the cliffhanger, is one that we've seen before. It's the corpse disposal room from chapter 394, where the dead guy gets cut up by the overly enthusiastic dissection sisters. So barring any more teleportation shenaniganry, at the very least what Nobunaga and Henry are going to discover saga is going to be unpleasant. However, back to the initial room itself, it's also very disconcerting because it appears to have been created by aura. Nobunaga can't even cut through the walls, indicating that they're conjured, transmuted, or even worse, something specialized. However, I would say that the Occam's razor solution is that the room was conjured, particularly because it's not the most complicated feat in the world to perform, and there was also this one-off line by Gelato in a previous chapter that there seemed to be a lot of left-handed conjurers, implying that the Hale Lee family have something of a conjurer surplus happening. The only thing that gives me pause for thought is that one, stupidly disturbing panel of Morena. This image legitimately gives me chills. I hate looking at it because it was inserted so ominously. Why is it there? What is it implying? Is it implying that Morena is currently watching Nobunaga and Henry? Or is it implying that this whole room is Morena's fabrication? Which I will say would make some sense. She is the game master after all, so it's very in keeping with that motif that she would also be the one creating the dungeons for the players. But that smile she has is simply disturbing. Like she is toying with Nobunaga and Henry. And again, to be fair, they have just walked right into her trap. The Hale Lee family, for the first time in this conflict, are currently at least one step ahead here. And I'm definitely nowhere near as confident about our Nen veterans surviving here as I was in the outside world. Because now the Hale Lee family have the numbers, they also have the information because they've seen both Henry and Nobunaga at work. And in addition to that, they have complete control of the environment. And the sad irony of either Nobunaga or Henry dying here is that they would be destined to end up just like Sarasa. So there's an irony for Nobunaga there if either he or his new best friend were to suffer that same fate. Here's a brief glimpse into the future now. If you're unaware, Togashi went on a bit of a Twitter spree, posting cryptic pictures of his manuscripts. And what I will say for the scribbles that we've seen of chapter 399 is that it looks like some stuff's about to go down. Also, I have a massive spoiler confirmed for chapter 400, which I'll tell you about in a bit. But first, Togashi's author comment this week gave us some massive news. Staff member Tanehana here. The chapters running right now and the next 30 were all written 4 years ago. So I want to show you what we are drawing right now. And then it gets cut off. But this is confirmed that there are indeed at least 30 more chapters in the works. With that said, I wouldn't expect them all at once. They'd be more likely to be released in batches with breaks in between, maybe a couple of months. But still, this is better news than I ever could have dreamed of. And also, here is something huge that we've known about for a while now if you keep up with the Togashi news, but it's becoming very relevant now. But Togashi on Twitter did confirm that chapter 400 is when we will finally see the return of Kurapika, because Togashi quite blatantly posted his full Kurapika sketch from the chapter. And the reason why I bring that up is because we're at 398 and that's 400, so it looks like we're going to be switching things up real soon. Potentially moving away from the Mafia stuff and back to all of the tier 1 prince business. And what that means for Nobunaga and Henry is either that we could be left on a massive cliffhanger regarding their fates, or in the worst case scenario, both of their stories could be very suddenly wrapped up in the next 2 chapters.